a good day to die. This is some of the titles. They give a hint, a lot of hints about what he lived from, lived through, lived for, and shared with us, I think. Combination of elements and attitudes and tones that I think our recent winner of the Nobel Prize, this is one of the few, this is actually the only American poet I can think of that I'm almost certain Bob Dylan would really love to read. He didn't have time for a lot of things, kinds of things, Bob, and neither did Jim. But I think just about every kind of note and combination of note and chords of emotions that Harrison comes up with, hit or miss, he misses sometimes, but it's all part of the risk that's needed to get to the heart of things, which he almost always, well, he did really always get to the heart of it in some fashion or another. I opened this book, Shape of the Journey, while Pam was reading what she was reading. And let's see if I can find that poem again that I opened it to. Oops. I'm sorry. When I brought this book up here, I skipped it. Okay, so I'll just pick another poem. Actually, I'll read you one of the poems that Pam read you because you couldn't hear it. You heard the beginning. This is from Return to Earth. I no longer believe in the idea of magic, Christs, the shelf, the self, metal Buddhas, Bibles. A horse is the only space his hoarseness requires. That line, a horse is the only is only the space his hoarseness requires. Who else could have written that line? It's beautiful, it's funny, it's hilarious, it's absolutely true, and it's unique. I've never seen that kind of line written before. If I pissed in the woods, he doesn't take himself so seriously. He's not preaching. If I pissed in the woods, would a tree see my ear fall off, and would the ear return to the body on the morning of the third day? Do the bow trees even remember the Buddhas who slept beneath them? I admit that yesterday I built an exploratory altar. Who can squash his delight in incomprehension? So on a piece of old newspaper, I put an earthworm on a maple leaf, the remains of a bluebird after the cat was finished, head and feet, some dog hair, shavings from when we trimmed the horse's hoofs, a snake skin, a stalk of ragweed, a gourd, a lemon, a cedar splinter, a non-symbolic doorknob, a bumblebee with his juice sucked out by a wasp. Before this altar, I invented a doggerel mantra. It is this, it is this, it is this. When we started here, and Jesse asked me to introduce our esteemed Doug Peacock. He caught me by surprise, but I'm going to tell you how we met. We met through my sister-in-law, but we met really before that. I'd been reading and following his work with the Grizzlies for many years, and I sent you at one point a short little group of poems called Coot, I believe, and I sent them from the 12th floor of Hunter College, where I was teaching at that time, and I was looking out over the city and thinking, this neon wilderness is no wilderness at all, and I was just wishing I was out there somewhere with you, and so I sent you that particular group of poems, which is about a character who does go out into those kind of places. That's like 10, 12 years at least before we met, 15 years maybe before we met in the flesh, I mean. And that we met through tennis, because Doug is a very good and avid and hard to kill tennis player. Even when his knee was beginning to go, he was still holding up his own against some pretty powerful adversaries. And at one point they were talking about knees and tennis and writers and all kinds of odd things, and Val mentioned her sister was a writer, and he said, what's her name? And she said, Pam Huschuk. And then she says, oh, and her husband's a writer too. He says, what's his name? And he says, you know, William Pitt Root. He says, oh, he says, I used to deliver his mail, for one thing, in Tucson, Arizona, basically during the 90s. I was a poet laureate of Tucson at that time, but I was actually teaching in New York City. So I flew out. I'd fly out Monday morning early, and I'd fly back Wednesday night really late, so I could teach at Hunter College and live where I wanted to, because I didn't like New York all that well. Anyway, so we had met that way, you know, before we actually met through Val and so on the tennis courts, and I had the pleasure of having one of the last games with you before you had your knee replaced.
Before I blew my knee out.
It's the only way I could ever have hoped to match his blows. He's quite a good tennis player. But I also saw him reading in the town of Ajo, which is a town of, what would you say, 1,200 maybe people? Something like that. It's very small. Smaller than that.
Active border control.
Yeah.
And it's like 230.
The nearest town to Ajo in southern central Arizona is a town called Y, W-H-Y. And by the way, outside of the town, as you go through it, there's a small sign, but it's a formal sign, like the highway patrol sign. And there's a group of apparently of elders in the town of Y who like to meet. And so the sign reads, Y Elders. That's a little scary to people of our generation, you know? But when he read in a little bar, about the only bar really in Ajo, which also has halfway decent hamburgers. It had a capacity of about 50 people, but there was 150 people there, crammed in there, plus about 125 backpacks, because people came in off the desert to hear what Doug had to say. And as Doug was reading, I was taking pictures of him left and right. I've never showed you those pictures, by the way, telephoto stuff, you know, from a distance, just his face. And it really looked like you were one of the charismatic preachers that people do come in out of the wilderness for. It really did. I was very impressed. Fortunately, he has a much better sense of humor, however, than most of those folks. We're going to have a question-answer period.
Yeah.
And after, I think, with Charlotte's stuff, we can
Yeah.
Okay, we can do some questions.
Charlotte Lowe is here, and the three of us are old friends of Jim in various ways. And I think, you know, I would really like to hear from you at this point, because there's endless stories up here, but I'd like to know any stories you have, or any comments, or any questions about Jim Harrison and his work. You know, I might add, when I was a hippie mailman, Ed Edby was actually living at my house in Tucson, way out in the desert. And I told him about this, I deliver this mail route, and there'd be this one house I'd go to, and it was this poet guy, Bill Root, and he had all these pretty girls, these pretty college girls hanging out there all the time. They're, you know, it was like, I'd wait for that corner, you know, to kind of see the scene. It was like coming around in a Playboy mansion almost, you know. And the only other guy that I knew that was such a chick magnet as Bill Root was my friend Tom Hayden, you know, and I was in on the beginnings of SDS, and you know, I invited Martin Luther King to speak at the University of Michigan. I did that all by myself, and Tom Hayden, who was 3 or 4 years older than me, was my mentor, of course. And he was this kind of pimply guy from Hamtramck, you know, a Catholic guy. He had all the pretty ones, all his life. He had all the pretty ones, and that's Bill Root. Hey, listen, could we turn maybe a light on here? And if anybody has anything to say or questions of any of us, or comments, you know, we can talk, ask us to tell stories or anything. I can't see too well out there, so.